Okay, so I'm going to have this app, and it's just obviously going to be extremely, it's just a sketch. So it's going to have an app component, which is the primary component, and then its app is going to render this intermediate component. So let me get that in there. So app is going to render this intermediate component, and then the intermediate component is going to render these other two components called page 1 and page 2. Wrap this in a div. So you can think if, you know, for this scenario to really make sense, you have to imagine intermediate as being a whole bunch of levels, basically. But so now we have, let's say we have some state, and this doesn't have to be actually at app at the top level. It could be any, you know, any kind of node in your React tree, but we'll use app. So app is going to have some kind of state or information that it wants to pass to these two components down here, page 1 and page 2. In order to do that, it has to go through this intermediate component, but the intermediate component doesn't actually use any of that, or it doesn't use that particular information. The intermediate component may use all kinds of other state and props and do other things, but part of what it's doing, at least, is serving just as it's just a path from app to the two pages. So we could, if we need to get information from app to page 1 or page 2, we could just pass it as props. So pass props from app to intermediate, and then in intermediate, we get those same props and then pass them on to page 1 and page 2. So that would work. But if we have a long sequence or a long chain, then it becomes inconvenient and harder to keep track of. So I'm going to basically mimic a login. I'm not going to create the form and everything. So we'll see a more filled in example. This is just kind of a basic sketch, just so you can see what it looks like. But we're gonna have I'm gonna make this a class first off.
Is this something, again, that has to be class-based, what you're showing us, or can it be both?
No, so I'll do it class-based first, and then I'll do it functionally with hooks.
Okay, I was wondering, like, the error checking from when did your Tuesday that it had to be class-based.
Yeah. So React actually the context component is something that you'll call a function and it will return the component that you use. So we'll see that in a sec, but we're not actually going to really be making the component. Okay, so in app.js, so this is now a class component. So let's give it some state. And this is just going to represent, being logged in. So the idea behind this, so the use case would be if you have a user logged in and lots of pages in your app, maybe all the pages, or it doesn't have to be all of them, but lots of components and pages need to know about the user. So whether that's like, whether they need the token. So if they're making API requests to your server, they're going to need some kind of authentication token, depending on how you're implementing that. You might just need things like user preferences or information from their profile, and an avatar image or whatever. So you could centralize, so when the user logs in, you could basically put all of the user information in one place. So this will kind of just be a stand-in for any of that. So we have this is logged in, and then we're going to I'm just going to put an event listener on this H1 tag, and we'll have something to change the state. So we'll just, you can either log in or out. It's just a switch. So all right, so we have something going here. Let's see if this works. We can check the state. Refresh this. Okay, so we have state is logged in as false. If I click this, it goes to true. So I have state on my app and I can change it. What I need for these, a bunch of components down farther in my tree to also have that state. So rather than passing it in and using this intermediary, we're going to create, we're actually going to create a context component. So I'm going to add another component here. Let's call it user context, maybe. And what I'm going to do here is it's very simple. There's a function called CreateContext. So let's look at the documentation. So the context API, you can look at this. It's this tutorial isn't always entirely clear. Where is this creation? Okay, so the way you create this context component is just by calling this function. So it's very simple. So we'll do that. We'll import. And then here we'll just do const create context. And just like with use state, you can start it off with a default value. But we're just going to leave that blank, and then we're going to export. Okay. So once we create this component, using it is slightly more complicated. So when we create this component, it actually creates two components. There are two kind of subcomponents that you get inside of this user context. One of them is a provider, and the other one is a consumer. So the provider will keep the information that you want, which could include functions, and the consumer will enable an end user to actually retrieve that data. So this gets divided into two. So here, wherever we want to keep our state that's changing, we're gonna include the provider element. So I'm gonna import this user context that we just created. So import okay, so now I have access to this, and I'm gonna wrap whatever I need to have this, which in this case will just be the intermediate, but this could be any node or subnode. So we're gonna do okay. So I have this this user context component, but I can't just use this directly. This is going to be the provider. So user context dot provider. And then we can decide what values this thing will get as props. So we want to use state from here as a prop. So we're kind of like we're taking the state from app and we're putting it in another component that's available basically globally in our application. So what we want is this is logged in. So is so we're just passing this in as a prop. Okay, so we have this as a prop. User context is sorry. So yeah, you can't use the brackets here if you're doing the default export. All right, so let's take a look at this again. Okay, so I have the app which has state. This is logged in, and the provider has its children, so that the provider itself is going to pass through everything, and also has this is logged in prop. Okay, so now that I have this provider set up, and it's going to react to what's going on in the app, the components that I want to be able to consume this this prop, I need to wrap those in a consumer. So I'll go into intermediate, and again, this could be as many levels down as you like. And I'm going to import the user context. And I'm going to wrap these in the provider. So user context dot provider. So I have these, but I can't simply do it like this. What I need to actually do is wrap these in a function that's going to receive the context object. So what I'm going to do, instead of directly putting those in, let me get rid of those for a sec. I'll put in some JavaScript. And here what we're going to do is we're going to write a function. It's going to take this will be the context, which is whatever we give to the, all right, sorry, this is a consumer. So this will be whatever we gave to the consumer, which in this case is just the is logged in. And then this is going to return these two components. And then we're going to pass in whatever we want. This will be, we could pass in a more complicated, but we'll just call it user stuff. And this will be, we'll do the same thing for this other one. Okay, so we have this consumer. So the provider is over here. We're using it in here. We originally created by calling this CreateContext function. This CreateContext function returns something that has two parts. It has a provider and a consumer. You can see the provider, and the provider is going to accept whatever information you want to be globally or nearly globally available in your application. And then wherever you want to use it, you can wrap it in a consumer. So we'll wrap this in that same context, that same context object. We'll wrap it in a consumer, and then we can access that and pass it in as a prop to whatever components we want. So then in page 1 and page 2, we can do something like okay, I'm going to do the same thing with component 2, page 2. All right, so let's take a look. These are not actually rendering. So let me check that.
Is it because we pass them it's called user stuff in the way we pass it instead of is logged in?
Yeah, but they should still be showing up anyway. But yeah, you're right. I did name it. So dot. This is actually a bad name. I was going to add to it later, but just for now. Let's see. think I have to specifically call this value when I create the context.
Before it was showing up as a child, now it's just gone entirely. Like before underneath there, it said all of them. Now they're just all three of them are gone.
Yeah, I'm just doing something stupid here. Okay, so I have my app, I have my provider. The provider should take a value which is based on the state here. I have created the user context. So the provider and then the consumer I'm using in the intermediate. Context returning. Oh, I am not returning this. Okay, so always good to return things. All right, so I have this app where I have the state that has login information, and I have, imagine way down in the chain, a whole bunch of components that need this particular prop. So rather than passing it down, by hand through all these, we're kind of detaching it, and then we can put it wherever we want and have it immediately available. Those intermediate components. So the context value here is going to be false, and we have that as a prop here. And if we click on app, we can see that they both change and get updated. So that's basically all there is to it. We can also treat this just like anything else. We can also have functions. So if we wanted to be able to log out a user from farther down in our component chain, we could also pass in something else. So let's do object. So instead of passing in a single value, we'll pass in an object, and we'll pass in a okay, and I'm gonna just, let's say that only the second page will have that capability. So I have to change this so it won't be user stuff anymore. It will be this .props .user stuff I believe we have that, and then the function. Let's say if you click here, you can log out. So on click, that will be this .props user stuff I think that's what I called it. So let's see if that works. String undefined. So let's see what I actually called it. Logged in. All right. Man, logged in, logged in. Okay, so now I can log in and out by clicking this H1. I should also be able to log in by clicking the page 2. So page 2 also now can log me in or out. So I'm basically creating global state or potentially global state. So that's the basic idea. I can show you how to do it functionally now, which is pretty simple, easier than the class base. So the first part is the same. So the first part where you create this context object, that works the same. You create the context object. This provider, in the same way, it creates a provider and a consumer. So that's exactly the same. The only difference here is how you actually use it. So if you go into the page 2, so we'll import component, and then we'll import use context. That's the hook. So we'll get rid of this stuff. This won't be this dot props. Actually, it'll just be oh, let me actually make this a functional component first. This will call page 2. All right, so use context. What I can do here is we'll call it user stuff too. Use context, and I'm also gonna have to import that the context object that I created. So import so once I create that, then I can use all of the properties directly on user stuff. So we look at the context here, the hook we're getting. So it works the same way. Basically, it's basically the same whether you're using functions or classes. So that's the basic idea. The context API is used when you want to create basically global, some kind of global state or something somewhat global that lots of components need, or that either that, you know, basically every component needs, which could be something like basic profile information. You might want every component to have information about the user profile, or something like, you know, login information. Can also be things like user preferences, even things like Yeah, I mean, basically anything that will be shared across components throughout the app. Okay, and we're not going to see this today, but on Saturday, I just want to introduce the context API just as a concept and work through a very simple example, and we'll use it on Saturday.